Hello and welcome to another episode of Reading Together from Sea Harp Press. I'm Eugene Luning, co-founder of Sea Harp, and today we'll be continuing our journey through C.S. Lewis's classic, The Screwtape Letters. Just to remind you, this is actually a HarperCollins book, but it is a favorite of the staff at Sea Harp, so as we walk through letter by letter, chapter by chapter, what we do is read these timeless words, and then here and there, as I feel that inward prompting of the Spirit, I'll stop and share with you perhaps a scripture, a tie-in to the Gospels, maybe something I myself have learned through reading this book, whatever it might be. It's just sort of a journey together in those promptings that the Lord brings. So, without any further ado, we're going to be in letter number 6. And as always, I like to remind you, the Screwtape Letters is written from the inverse, so to the opposite side. It's written from a devil to his nephew devil. So don't get confused as we go through. The enemy, as he calls him, is actually our God. So again, chapter 6. My dear Wormwood, I am delighted to hear that your patient's age and profession make it possible, but by no means certain, that he will be called up for military service. We want him to be in the maximum uncertainty, so that his mind will be filled with contradictory pictures of the future, every one of which arouses hope or fear. There is nothing like suspense and anxiety for barricading a human's mind against the enemy. He wants men to be concerned with what they may do. Our business is to keep them thinking about what will happen to them. And I have to stop immediately after that first paragraph. Just an hour ago, I took a walk with a young friend of mine who's very dear to me. And he's in his middle 20s when so many of us went through those questions existentially of what am I about? Where am I going? What is my career going to hold? And I tried to encourage him from the positive side, not Screwtape's side. I tried to encourage him with the ability to actually release the future. When we think of Matthew 6:34, where it says, do not be anxious about tomorrow, for tomorrow will care for itself. Do you think Jesus meant that figuratively? I don't think so. I actually think he wants us to attend to the business of today in his will and not be giving all our thoughts to the future. Not be giving our thoughts to what might happen to us, what twists in the road I might come to. Instead, to be focused today on what we are called to do. I like that demarcation Lewis gives us. What may happen to us versus what we're called to do. One, if you notice, is passive. The other is excitingly active. I'll keep reading. Your patient will, of course, have picked up the notion that he must submit with patience to the enemy's will, meaning God's will. What the enemy means by this is primarily that he should accept with patience the tribulation which has actually been dealt out to him, the present anxiety and suspense. It is about this that he is to say, thy will be done, and for the daily task of bearing this, that the daily bread will be provided. It is your business to see that the patient never thinks of the present fear as his appointed cross, but only of the things he is afraid of. Let him regard them as his crosses. Let him forget that, since they are incompatible. They cannot all happen to him. And let him try to practice fortitude and patience to them all in advance. For real resignation at the same moment to a dozen different and hypothetical fates is almost impossible, and the enemy does not greatly assist those who are trying to attain it. Resignation to present and actual suffering, even where that suffering consists of fear, is easier and is usually helped by this direct action. Man, what a picture of our ability to stew in, to go in circles around, and to live in fear of all kinds of hypotheticals which may or may not happen to us. I like that Lewis points out here that oftentimes those hypothetical fates are actually incompatible with each other. We worry about this worry and that fear. The two of them can't even coexist in some unknowable future, and yet we worry about both of them. And you know what we do when we do that? We waste the present, today. Again, the place where we may actively do his will rather than, again, worry about what may happen to us. Friends, we are not subjects to some blind fate, to some determinism of an unknowable fate, destiny, etc. Friends, we actually know the one who is holding the whole thing. This world, the universe, the cosmos. We know the one who made everything, who made us. We know the one who knit us together in our mother's womb, who grew us up, who called us to himself on a particular day or season in our lives. Friends, we know the one who holds the whole story in his hands, and yet we fear some uncertain fate. Friends, that's not who we've been called to be. We're playing right into Screwtape's hands when we live that way. I'll continue. An important spiritual law is here involved. I have explained that you can weaken his prayers by diverting his attention from the enemy himself to his own states of mind about the enemy. On the other hand, fear becomes easier to master when the patient's mind is diverted from the thing feared to the fear itself, considered as a present and undesirable state of his own mind. And when he regards the fear as his appointed cross, he will inevitably think of it as a state of mind. One can therefore formulate the general rule. In all activities of mind which favor our cause, encourage the patient to be unself-conscious and to concentrate on the object. But in all activities favorable to the enemy, bend his mind back on itself. Let an insult or a woman's body so fix his attention outward that he does not reflect, quote, I am now entering into the state called anger or the state called lust, unquote. Contrariwise, let the reflection, quote, my feelings are now growing more devout or more charitable, unquote, so fix his attention inward that he no longer looks beyond himself to see our enemy or his own neighbors. We talked about this, I think it was 2 chapters ago. But I'm struck here again, it's almost a prepositional explication of what we are trying to not be about and what we are trying to be about in this Christian life. It's right at the beginning of that paragraph. I have explained to you that we can weaken his prayers by diverting his attention from the enemy, God himself, to his own states of mind about the enemy. I get the opportunity in my day-by-day ministry life to be with lots of people, to take walks, to have coffees, to have lunches, to dive deep into their spiritual journey and oftentimes their uncertainties about their spiritual journey. And I've said this on Reading Together before. I say it practically everywhere I ever get the chance to speak about Jesus. It is worlds apart, knowing Jesus and knowing about Jesus. What we tend to think of when we say knowing about Jesus is frankly an ideology of Christianity or a Christian worldview. And we can carry that around and it can feel quite powerful. But when it gets confronted by someone who doesn't care, who is living in a state that is completely away and counter-opposed to it, we cannot break through with our knowledge about. It's just one other ideology that's confronting that person who just doesn't care. But when we know Jesus, when we've been talking to him since this morning, when we were driving our car to the office, worshiping in our spirit, when we walk into that meeting at 2:30 p.m. and we pray on the way in and ask Jesus to make us useful in that meeting, well, then people are confronted by Jesus. As Paul often says, this idea of Christ being in us, the infilling, the indwelling of the Spirit. So friends, my friend, do you know Jesus? Or do you know about him? Who are you talking to when you talk to God? Is it a nebulous sort of out there, away from you sort of God? Or is it the one you've come to know, with whom you have intimacy? That right there might decide the quality, the flavor of your entire Christian life. I'll keep reading. As regards his more general attitude to the war, again, to remind you, this is the European War, also known as World War II, he's talking about. You must not rely too much on those feelings of hatred, which the humans are so fond of discussing in Christian or anti-Christian periodicals. In his anguish, the patient can, of course, be encouraged to revenge himself by some vindictive feelings directed toward the German leaders, and that is good so far as it goes. But it is usually a sort of melodramatic or mythical hatred directed against imaginary scapegoats. He has never met these people in real life. They are lay figures modeled on what he gets from newspapers. The results of such fanciful hatred are often most disappointing. And of all humans, the English are in this respect the most deplorable milksops. They are creatures of that miserable sort who loudly proclaim that torture is too good for their enemies, and then give tea and cigarettes to the first wounded German pilot who turns up at the back door. Do what you will. There is going to be some benevolence as well as some malice in your patient's soul. The great thing is to direct the malice to his immediate neighbors whom he meets every day, and to thrust his benevolence out to the remote circumference, to people he does not know. The malice thus becomes wholly real, and the benevolence largely imaginary. There is no good at all in inflaming his hatred of Germans if, at the same time, a pernicious habit of charity is growing up between him and his mother, his employer, and the man he meets in the train. Think of your man as a series of concentric circles, his will being the innermost, his intellect coming next, and finally his fancy. You can hardly hope at once to exclude from all the circles everything that smells of the enemy, but you must keep on shoving all the virtues outward till they are finally located in the circle of fantasy, and all the desirable qualities inward into the will. I'm going to pause there. We've already covered this in a couple of the letters, but the reality of our Christian life is actually most and best shown first with the people who see us the most. Like right now, I'm sitting in the study of my house. My daughter is across the hallway. My middle son is downstairs. The way that I conduct myself finishing this video and walking out that door is what I think of Jesus. When I go over soon to pick up my youngest son, the way that I greet him and take him to the next thing, that's how he knows Jesus and me. If later today I stop by a coffee shop and walk up to the counter and I'm interacting with that barista, what I think of Jesus is what's coming across to that person. So if I have benevolent, as Screwtape is talking about, ideas of people in another country, I think of them fondly and hope the best for them. That is almost valueless. Whereas if today I'm confronted with, say, 50 people in the course of a day with my movements around the city, if all 50 of those people have a direct experience of my attention, of Christ in me, of my care, even affection for them, my desire to hear their story, to know them, to really care, even if it's only for 1 minute, well, then I have carried the gospel into 50 lives. It's real. It's in a tight part of that concentric circle picture that he gives. I think that's a fascinating picture. I'm going to continue. In fact, this is the end of the chapter. It is only insofar as they reach the will and are there embodied in habits that the virtues are really fatal to us. I don't, of course, mean what the patient mistakes for his will, the conscious fume and fret of resolutions and clenched teeth, but the real center, what the enemy calls the heart. All sorts of virtues painted in the fantasy, or approved by the intellect, or even in some measure loved and admired, will not keep a man from our Father's house. Indeed, they may make him more amusing when he gets there. Your affectionate uncle, Screwtape. That takes me to something that I was reading this morning, and I'll end off with this. There's that haunting part towards the end of the Sermon on the Mount, where it says, "Not everyone who says to me, 'Lord, Lord,' will enter the kingdom of heaven, but he who does the will of my Father who is in heaven." Now, I don't want to get into some discussion of salvation theology here, but I think you and I can agree, as sentient, smart, normal, clear-thinking people, that if something holds little value for us, it probably has little value. If you and I do not engage in the commands of Jesus for our lives, if we do not carry the gospel out and into actual people's lives, then what are we doing? From the heart, we carry out the Father's will today. That is the call upon our lives. The call upon our lives is not to just meaninglessly call out, "Lord, Lord," and have, again, just sort of ideology about Jesus that we hold and hold against people who disagree with us. What we are to do is to love them, to show them Jesus in real time, again in that coffee shop, in that meeting at 2:30 this afternoon. So my friends, if you and I would call ourselves believers in the Jesus who's opposed to good old Screwtape and wormwood, then from the heart, we have to live it. We have to go after it this day, to ask by his Spirit to be encouraged, to be carried forth, to have his joy, his peace, and frankly, to be of use to the kingdom of which we are citizens. So friends, thank you again for joining me for Reading Together. I love these few minutes we get each day. We've been in C.S. Lewis's classic, the Screwtape Letters. That was letter number 6. And I can't wait for tomorrow and looking at letter number 7. Have a wonderful rest of your day.